Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, and I'm taking care of business. Joining me today is Alicia Planincic, who is Manager of Policy and Economics with the Business Council of Alberta. Thank you, Alicia, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, the labor force survey was out this morning by Statistics Canada. Alberta gained 7,000 jobs this month, the month of January, that is. Can you tell me what was happening in the province when it came to employment and labor?
Yeah, so maybe actually I'll first start by talking about what's happening at the national level, which will help us understand a little bit about what's happening differently at the provincial level. So at the national level, kind of in a nutshell, what happened in January is we're seeing the impact of Omicron. Two ways. So one is via new restrictions, right, which put capacity limits in place, it closed some businesses down, which had kind of this direct impact on employment, as well as we had a lot of folks actually out of the workforce sick. So about 10% of the workforce, if you can believe it, was out of the workforce at some point over that week sick. So that could have been with COVID, that could have been isolating, etc. So at the national level, we saw actually a pretty big drop in employment of 200,000 jobs lost, about 1 percentage point. Now, going into Alberta, however, what's a bit different here is we didn't put those same stronger restrictions in place like we saw in the big provinces like Ontario and Quebec, right? So we didn't see that big impact in employment here that we saw nationally. Instead, we saw, yeah, as you say, a 7,000 jobs gain, which, you know, in Alberta with population of 4 million, it's about, I'm going to call that flat. So pretty flat. So we at least avoided those job losses, but I do want to be clear that we are still seeing the impact of this kind of revolving door of folks who are either sick with COVID or isolating with COVID. We're still seeing that impact in Alberta like other provinces.
The other thing too, you know, when it comes and you break down the jobs, I think I noticed that the full-time jobs, there were almost 4,000 that were lost, but on the part-time side, almost 11,000 were gained. So what does that signify?
Yeah, and this is really interesting because usually we see this kind of going hand in hand with that hard hit sector of food and accommodation. So like restaurants and bars and hotels. This time though, it doesn't seem to be driven by that. In fact, the two industries that were up was actually manufacturing, which has done very well from an economic perspective, as well as what's called information culture and recreation. So things like gyms, for instance. So I would say probably that second industry could be driving that those part-time jobs there. Manufacturing though is a little bit, it was a bit of a surprise to me, honestly. Yeah, kind of some interesting industries driving growth.
And let's talk about the unemployment rate. It dropped by 0.3 percentage points to 7.2% in the province. Still quite high, I guess, on the national level.
Yeah, so a couple of things to keep in mind. So one is we are about back to where we were pre-pandemic as far as the unemployment rate. So that of itself is a good thing. But we do have to keep in mind that 7% is still quite high. And if we peel back those layers, about 20% of folks who are unemployed have been unemployed for over a year. And this is something that the BCA has really focused on over the last many months. We even put out a report because this is something that until we solve for this issue, we're not going to see a full healthy recovery for everyone.
Yeah. Now, just one last thing while we're on Alberta, when we look at it though from a year-over-year perspective, you know, the number of jobs gained in the past year is 117,300. The unemployment rate has dropped by 3.6% percentage points. So we're in a much better spot than we were a year ago, aren't we?
Certainly. I think it's really surprised most economists, even how quickly, and not just Alberta, but you know, overall nationally and in the US as well, how quickly economies have bounced back. That said, there's still some underlying concerns that I think we like to focus on just to make sure that things get fully recovered. In fact, one of the new things that we're noticing in Alberta is folks who are over the age of 55 are actually not working anymore like they were. So Yeah, we're seeing this, whether it's retirement or
Not me.
early retirement. Yeah, not you. You're not in the data set yet. But that's a big question, right? Are these folks going to rejoin? Are they going to unretire, so to speak? If not, I think we're going to face a lot of labor shortage challenges, right? Of these
Yeah.
folks who have left and not come back.
Okay, super. Well, the last thing, just I know the when you dig further down into the sort of the census metropolitan areas, it's a little more challenging to get accurate data. But what are the this month's numbers in January tell you about what's happening in the Calgary region?
Yeah, so what we're seeing, and what we've seen for a while, is still that unemployment in Calgary is still quite a bit higher than it is in Edmonton. Um, as you say, this data gets really tricky because it is a really small sample size, and we see kind of quite a bit of jumps month to month. But we have consistently seen that Calgary seems to be struggling more than Edmonton.
Okay, super then. And just last thing, when you look forward, what do you expect in terms of the labor situation in Alberta in the next few months?
I think so. For Alberta, I think there are a lot of really good signs when we look more broadly as far as commodity prices, both oil and lumber. Things look good. Manufacturing growth looks really good. We're seeing new home builds, which is really exciting. In fact, the last data that we saw on interprovincial moves showed that more people are moving to Alberta. So I think there's a lot of momentum. There are a lot of really good signs, but I think Alberta, just like every other jurisdiction, has quite a bit to figure out as far as, how do we safely remove restrictions and really ease back into a more steady kind of flow of normal life. And so I think that's going to be the challenge. How do we get back to normal life while minimizing those risks, making sure kids are in school, making sure folks are in the workforce, et cetera. So that's the big challenge before us over this year, I think.
All right, super. Thanks for joining us, Alicia.
Thanks, Mario.
All right, that was Alicia Planincic, who is Manager of Policy and Economics with the Business Council of Alberta. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, and this has been Taking Care of Business. Thanks for joining us today.